Good evening, brothers and sisters in Christ. And for tonight's video, I wanted to touch a little bit on some principles of the postbellum economy, but also compare and contrast them with the life of Booker T. Washington, because Booker T. Washington's life provides a unique enigma in terms of a historical analysis of the factors that impacted the postbellum economy after the Civil War. So to summarize the general trends of the postbellum economy, one book that was written by David Danbaum called Sod Busting: How Families Made Farms on the 19th Century Plains provides us with an interesting perspective on how in the Great Plains region, families came together through forming strong relationships and communal bonds, but the primary social institution through which this was done was through the Christian church, actually. And there is another work made through an article called The Crime of 1873. Written by Milton Friedman, that actually refers to the Coinage Act of 1873, and what that ultimately did was create the gold standard, and it basically prevented any further production of silver bullion being coined into currency, and this had a detrimental impact that contributed to economic deflation and economic hardships for farmers and debtors that relied on silver coinage. And another trend that we get is actually from a an article on Garrett Hardin's Tragedy of the Commons, where it was a retrospective examined 50 years later. And what the principle is that it refers to the concept of being in a system where everyone benefits from a resource, yet only pay part of the cost. So in general, it would be considered rational for the individual to overuse the resource, despite collective use that will lead to the depletion of the said resource. So in modern vernacular, we might use like a free rider problem or something like that. So it's still particularly relevant. So, in general, we have this trend of economic deflation, hardship for farmers, but through it all, though, we had this trend of families and neighbors coming together through the social institutions like the church, even if they met in small house churches that were playing a major role in forming these Great Plains communities. And just with this examination of the tragedy of the commons principle. But with the life of Booker T. Washington, he is a very profound individual because in his biography, Up From Slavery, which was written in 1901, Washington argues that the manner in which to advance the black community is through education rather than political reform. He's primarily spoke on this through his struggles to remain pursuing his education at the Hampton Institute, and he actually pursued manual labor in order to cover his educational expenses. So that's one thing that was interesting about his life. And in another article called Education Will Solve the Race Problem, a Reply, he actually expands upon the principle of education a little bit further. He actually writes, "When I speak of education as a solution for the race problem, I do not mean education in the narrow sense, but education which begins in the home and includes training in industry and in habits of thrift, as well as mental, moral, and religious discipline, and the broader education which comes from contact with the public sentiment of the community in which one lives. Nor do I confine myself to the education of the Negro." So he's talking about how this education should be emphasized for everyone. And lastly, in his address at the Cotton States at an International Exposition, he argues that the black community should effectively cast down their bucket where they are. In this in this concept, Washington means that blacks in the South should work together with their white neighbors, as he writes, cast it down in agriculture, mechanics, and commerce, in domestic service, and in the professions. And in this connection, it is well to bear in mind that whatever other sins the South may be called upon to bear. So, in summary, Washington's life kind of individually counteracted some scenarios, like in terms of the economic hardship concept with the Coinage Act of 1873, or the heart with the commons principle, if you will. So we need to keep an open mind with how sometimes a person's life doesn't fit the mold, but Washington definitely was not a free rider, and he worked hard for his education. So, thank you all for watching what I had to say tonight, and I hope you all find this interesting. God bless you all.